Welcome everybody. I'm going to try this a different way today, but essentially we're going to focus on the topic of our next unit, which is the structure of the cardiovascular system. But this makes sense when you put it in context of all of the other things that we've been learning. So if you think about the anatomy of the bones, the skeletal system, and the muscle system that we focused on, and how muscles actually contract with the sliding filament theory, you know that in order for muscles to contract, they need ATP, which is the energy molecule that we just finished the last unit on, the three pathways that our body uses to create ATP. The anaerobic alactic, anaerobic lactic, and cellular respiration. Now, that's all about the delivery of oxygen, especially cellular respiration, the delivery of oxygen in order for our body to create a lot of ATP, which is essential for the functioning of our bodies. And so the delivery of that ATP is through the cardiovascular system. So we're going to talk about the structure of the cardiovascular system, and then particularly think about the vascular system, which is the series of arteries and veins and capillaries that are used to deliver oxygen through the blood, and then of course blood flow. So let's start. So right now, what you're going to need in order to finish up or complete this activity is the activity package that I sent to you through EDSB. And once that's opened up on your desktop, you'll be able to follow along and work through the presentation. You can pause at any point, pause the video so that you can fill in the activity and watch any videos and do any activities that need to be done throughout the video in order to complete this. So here we go. First, let's talk a little bit about the heart. The heart is actually a double pump, okay? Think about a double pump because it pumps blood to two different places. It's going to pump the blood to your lungs, but it's also going to pump the blood to the rest of your body. So it's got a double pump. Some terms that you should be familiar with as we move through it. Myocardium, that's the specialized muscle tissue. So we've said there's three different types of muscle: skeletal, smooth, and cardiac. Well, the myocardium is the specialized muscle tissue that forms the heart. It's a specialized name for that. It's considered a double pump because it's divided into right and left sides. The right side of the heart delivers blood to your lungs, and the left side of your heart delivers blood to the rest of your body. There's a number of different types of circulation. The first is pulmonary circulation. So I referred to the right side of the heart pumping blood to the lungs. That is pulmonary circulation. Whenever you hear the word pulmonary, it refers to the lungs. Okay, that's a good little trick to remember as you're processing this. So the function of pulmonary circulation is to bring blood from the right side of the heart to the lungs so that it becomes oxygenated, and then it goes back to the heart so that this oxygenated blood can then be delivered to the rest of the body. Okay? Systemic circulation is the role of the left side of the heart. And here, the left side of the heart takes the oxygenated blood that's just come from the lungs and sends it to the body, where the tissues receive that oxygen, and then that oxygen is obviously used for cellular respiration to create ATP so that cross-bridging can happen so that you don't die. Because remember, if your muscles are not functioning, then you are dead. Okay? So systemic circulation brings that oxygenated blood, the oxygen within it, to the rest of the body. Now, how does it do it? Well, the structure, again, we're talking about the structure of the cardiovascular system. We've talked about the structure of the heart as a double pump. myocardium. Its function is systemic and pulmonary circulation. Now we'll talk about the structure of arteries and veins. Arteries, the word starts with an A. It's helpful because so does the word away. So arteries are blood vessels that carry blood away from the heart. And so in systemic circulation, arteries carry the oxygenated blood from the left side of the heart toward the body tissues. In pulmonary circulation, arteries carry deoxygenated blood from the right side of the heart towards the lungs. So notice, arteries are always carrying blood away from the heart. Most of the time, it's oxygenated, but in the case of pulmonary circulation, it's deoxygenated blood. Veins are those blood vessels that carry blood toward the heart. So in systemic circulation, veins carry deoxygenated blood towards the right side of the heart. And then in pulmonary circulations, veins carry oxygenated blood towards the left side of the heart. Okay, so arteries are away, veins are towards. Okay, so now what I would like you to do is, in a separate tab in your browser, I would like you to do a Google search for the crash course on blood vessels. Once you've found the crash course on blood vessels, go ahead and watch that. That will give you a very good overview of how blood vessels work and what their function is and what their structure is and how those two things are related to each other. Okay. Now that you've watched that video from Crash Course, let's continue to talk about the structure of the cardiovascular system. We've talked about the heart a little bit. We've talked about arteries. We've talked about veins. But there's two other vascular structures. They're called arterioles and capillaries. So arterioles, you'll notice, sounds a lot like an artery, and that's because it's kind of what it is, but it's a lot smaller. So you've got arteries that come out of your heart. They branch out of your heart. They deliver blood away from your heart. And as those arteries continue away from the heart, they are subdivided into branches. Those branches are called arterioles. So the blood is still traveling away from the heart. And those arterioles are vessels in the blood circulation system that branch out from the arteries and lead to capillaries, where gas exchange eventually occurs. Surrounded by smooth muscle, arterioles are the primary site of vascular resistance. So what I want you to recognize about arterioles is they are continued branches of arteries. They get smaller and smaller, and they eventually turn into capillaries. And it's at the capillary level where gas exchange eventually occurs. That's where the oxygen that's in your blood actually leaves your blood and goes to the tissue. And remember, in cellular respiration, in the presence of oxygen, you can create a whole lot of ATPs from one glucose molecule. Well, this is where the oxygen comes from. It comes from the blood, it gets delivered to the tissues, and is used then by cellular respiration in order to create ATP. But it gets there, it travels there through the arteries and then arterioles, and the exchange actually happens at the capillaries. So now the second part of the slide, capillaries are the smallest of the blood vessels. They're tiny, and they enable the exchange of water, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and other nutrients and waste substances between the blood and the tissues of the body. So all of the exchange that's happening between oxygen, carbon dioxide, nutrients happens at the capillary level. The capillaries are one of your most important vascular structures. So what you can see here is let me get the heart. Okay, you'll notice it's blue, and you'll notice that part of it is red, the red structures and the blue structures. But essentially, there's two sides. The right side is the veins traveling, and then traveling towards the heart, and then you've got the arteries on the left side that are traveling away from the heart. And so as blood pumps from the left side, you'll notice that it gets branched out. These are arterioles, okay? All of these branches. And then as they eventually get to this point right here, that's called the capillary bed. And it's at the capillary bed where the oxygen and the nutrients that's carried in the blood diffuses into the tissues. And the gas exchange happens there. So the oxygen, you remember cellular respiration, right? One of the byproducts of cellular respiration is carbon dioxide, and the other byproduct is water. So when oxygen from the blood goes to the tissue, it's used by cellular respiration to create ATP, and the byproduct, carbon dioxide, then that's in the tissue, diffuses into the blood and continues on its journey. Now these right here are called venules, okay? They're still a part of the capillary bed, and those venules, or the capillaries, they end up branching together into venules, which then join together into the veins. So all of these are venules, go into these veins, and then they return to the right side of the heart. This is the right side of the heart. Okay, I'll put a big R there. Where from this side of the heart, then the blood is pumped to the lungs, where it picks up more oxygen and then gets delivered back to the heart so that it can travel through this whole circuit again. Okay, so let's move on to the next part. Right now, what I'd like you to do is I actually have a Google image of a capillary bed. Okay, here's the image of the capillary bed. This right here is an image of your heart. And you can see all of those squiggly lines are the microscopic capillaries. And those capillaries are so small, and the walls of those capillaries are so thin that the oxygen and the carbon dioxide and the nutrients can actually diffuse through the capillary wall. Okay, so there are just millions of them all around your body. You can just see how small they are. Now, kind of talked about the heart and the structure of the heart. The heart is a double pump. There's a left side and a right side, but there's also a top and a bottom, okay? And the top of your heart, the two chambers on the top of your heart are called atria, and there's two chambers in the bottom of your heart called ventricles, okay? So in total, you've got 4 chambers in your heart, 2 atria and 2 ventricles. So the heart is made up of those 4 chambers, 2 sides. The upper chambers are called the atria, and if you wanted to call just the singular is atrium, and the lower chambers are called ventricles. Blood is received into the atria and pushed out from the ventricles. So blood is always traveling from the atria into the ventricles. If we take a look at the main structures of the heart, this is a diagram that you're going to need to memorize. You're going to need to be able to label all of these structures of the heart. The major blood vessel, the biggest artery in the body, is the aorta. Okay, there are 2 lungs in your body, which means there's 2 pulmonary arteries. There's the left one, and then there is the right pulmonary artery. Okay, so you can see just here is the right pulmonary artery, and you've got this one right here, which is the left pulmonary artery. Okay, all of the blood that leaves those travels to the lungs. Same with these ones. Okay, and then you've got what's called the pulmonary trunk. Okay, which is the big, you can see only this section of it right here. The rest of it is behind the fat here. There's a little bit of fat. That's called the pulmonary trunk. Think of a tree. You've got one trunk, and then you've got branches that extend from that trunk. Okay, and then you've got lower down, you've got the left pulmonary veins. So now the blood that's coming from the oxygen now is returning back to the heart. And the same thing is true on this side. So you've got two sets of pulmonary veins, one on your left side, one on your right side. And then as we continue down the list, we've got the left atrium, which is the left top structure. And you've got the right atrium, which is the structure on the right top. And then what we've got, if you keep going down, is you've got the anterior intraventricular branch of left coronary artery and the great cardiac vein. And over here you've got the right coronary artery and the small cardiac vein. These four structures right here, those are the structures that actually feed the heart muscle, the myocardium, with oxygen and nutrients. Okay? And then you've got the other chambers. You've got the left ventricle here. So again, it's the bottom chamber. This is the biggest one in the whole heart, the biggest and the strongest. And then you've got the right ventricle. So all in total, 4 chambers, and they are divided up into 2 sides. Okay? And then last but not least, you've got the thoracic aorta. So the blood that comes out of the heart travels behind the heart and then continues to go to the rest of the body through the thoracic aorta. And then you've got the inferior vena cava, which is all of the blood that's returning back to the heart from the body, okay, after the oxygen has all been used up. So, the flow of blood through the heart. Blood is delivered to the right atrium from the superior and inferior vena cava. It passes through the tricuspid valve and enters the right ventricle. From there, the blood is pumped through the pulmonary semilunar valve and out through the pulmonary arteries to the lungs. The blood returns from the lungs through the pulmonary veins to the left atrium. It then passes through the bicuspid valve, it's also known as the mitral valve, and then enters into the left ventricle. The blood is then pumped out through the aortic semilunar valve into the aorta and throughout the systemic circulation. So you take a look here. The tracking, you see all these arrows, there's a ton of them. But let's start with the inferior vena cava right here and the superior vena cava. All of the blood from the upper part of your body, from your head and your shoulders, and all of the blood from the rest of your body below your heart, all travels either from below or from above through the vena cavas into the right atrium. All blood travels from the right atrium into the right ventricle. And then the right ventricle, from there it leaves, and it leaves out both sides of your heart through the pulmonary arteries, where it goes to the lungs. Then it returns through the pulmonary veins on both sides here, and all of the blood that's returning from the lungs travels to the left atrium, goes into the left ventricle, and then when the left ventricle contracts, all of this oxygenated blood travels out through the aorta. Some of it branches off to go up to the upper part of your body, and then the rest of it travels down the thoracic artery, and then it eventually gets branched off to the rest of your body. Okay, and that's how the oxygen gets delivered to the rest of your body. The structures on this diagram you're also going to need to know. Okay, so the chordae tendineae, those are just little cords that join on to the flaps, the valves that are in your heart to keep them going in the right direction. You've got the interventricular septum, which is the dividing wall between the left and the right chambers of the heart. You've got the papillary muscles and all of those structures that are a part of the heart. I want you to be able to label. So How does blood return back to the heart? There's a number of ways that blood travels back to the heart. One of the major ways is called the skeletal muscle pump. And the skeletal muscle pump, what I want you to recognize here is that all of these veins, so you've got a vein right here in the diagram, you've got these valves right here, and they open and then they close. But they're one-way valves. They only allow liquid, and in this case it's blood, to travel in one direction. It won't go down. It won't go backwards. And all of these veins are surrounded by muscles right here. Here's muscle 1, muscle number 2. So the skeletal muscle pump is whenever you move your muscles, whenever you contract your muscles, these muscles move and they squish the vein. They make it narrower, and it forces the blood to move. Think about a balloon filled with water, and when you squeeze it, that water moves in the direction. Now, in the case of a balloon, it travels in both directions. But in the case of a skeletal muscle pump, because of the valves, the blood only moves in one direction, and those valves force the blood towards the heart. So the skeletal muscle pump is one of the ways that your body automatically causes blood to travel back to the heart after it's been in your body. Now let's think about the composition of blood real briefly. Blood, obviously liquid. 55% of your blood is plasma, okay? And of that 55%, it's mostly water. That's why hydration is so important. So you've got 90% of your plasma is water, and then you've got some proteins and some other things that are involved in that plasma. And then 45% of your blood is formed elements, okay? And of those formed elements, 99% of them are your red blood cells, okay? And about 1% is white blood cells, otherwise known as leukocytes, okay, and platelets. Red blood cells are what are known as erythrocytes. Those are responsible for carrying oxygen in your blood. And the leukocytes, the white blood cells, are responsible for fighting diseases, okay? If you think of the word leukemia, that's cancer of the blood. That basically means that your leukocytes are not functioning properly, and there's something going on wrong in your blood when you have leukemia because it's related to leukocytes, okay? And platelets, those are blood clotting agents. So if you ever get a cut, you don't bleed to death. Those platelets join together and cause the stoppage of the bleeding. The cardiac cycle. So here we're talking about the electrical conduction system of your heart. So the cardiac cycle is the series of events that occurs through one heartbeat. And during that cycle, there's both a phase of relaxation, which is called diastole, in which the ventricle is filling up with blood. So during diastole, your heart is relaxed and your ventricle is filled with blood. And there's a phase of contraction, systole, when your heart is contracting and getting rid of the blood, okay? Blood pressure is the force exerted by the blood against the walls of the arteries and other vascular vessels. Blood pressure in each of the two phases, diastole and systole, is measured in millimeters of mercury. Probably you've heard of blood pressure. The typical good blood pressure is to have 120 over 80. Okay, so 120 would be the blood pressure during contraction, and 80 would be the blood pressure during the relaxation phase of your heart. Okay, so when blood pressure is reported or measured, it's often stated as being systolic pressure over diastolic. So for example, 120 over 80, which is what I just mentioned. Systolic blood pressure, that's the maximum pressure observed in your arteries during the contraction phase. So imagine your heart pushing blood through a tube. It's the measurement of that pressure when the blood is being pushed. That's systolic blood pressure. But when your heart is relaxed, then that is the pressure in your arteries Obviously, it's less because your heart is relaxed, so that means your arteries are going to be relaxed. That's the minimum pressure observed in your arteries. So just to wrap up, how does the anatomical structure of the cardiovascular system ensure the flow of blood through the heart and throughout the body? So that wraps up the presentation for now. Hopefully you now understand a little bit more of the cardiovascular system. Remember, at the very foundation of this all, it's about the delivery of oxygen to your working tissues. That oxygen is used during cellular respiration to create ATP, and that ATP is used in order to facilitate the sliding filament theory, muscle contraction, which allows you to remain alive. Hopefully this makes sense, and thanks for listening. Have yourself a great rest of the day.